everybody. Welcome to season 4, episode 13 of A Conversation with Cometan. Today, I am coming to you with not a lecture video, but more of just an informal kind of talk video on this topic, as you can see here on the screen, nihilism. I'm going to be explaining why I have referred to nihilism as a spectre, as something that is maybe bad, as something that is not sort of to be embraced. On the basis of my sort of Astronist philosophical positions. But anyway, so it's a little bit of a different video today. I've got this very, very basic few slides to kind of go through some topics that are kind of on my mind right now. So let's get into it. Nihilism is something that I often do think about, and the reason is not because I am a nihilist. Of course, I am the opposite, really, of a nihilist. The reason why I think of nihilism is because it is so opposite to my sort of Astronist worldview, and so I don't want this video to come across as me trying to say that nihilism shouldn't exist. Of course, I do think it should exist. We should be exploring ideas that we don't agree with, that we feel maybe a bit of hostility towards, because that will help us ground and explain and justify our own philosophical positions. Because this is sort of the, I know I've called nihilism a spectre, but this really is the kind of beauty of nihilism, really, is that it has so many sort of, it deconstructs so many of our ideas and sort of belief systems, if you will, that it becomes quite controversial and quite subversive. And that's why some people maybe are quite worried about nihilism, nihilistic thinking. And I am one of those people. I am one of those people who has seen, who has talked to, maybe they don't say that they are nihilists, but they do certainly profess certain ideas and beliefs that would be classified as nihilist. And that is a worry for me as someone whose worldview really is diametrically opposed to nihilism. Anyway, so let's get into so the essence is that, yes, I do think nihilism should still exist. Of course, it should still, it's a really important exercise for any person who holds a certain philosophical position. You have to be challenged by an opposing viewpoint, and nihilism would be that opposing viewpoint, for in contrast to Astronism, for example. So that's why I've picked on nihilism today. For those who don't know what nihilism is, you may want to pause the video now and go and take a look. Just do a short sort of, search online or something. But I am going to give you the definition now. So nihilism is not just one idea, but it's more of like a collection of ideas. And the idea basically centering around deconstructing and kind of rejecting, really, meaning. So a nihilist would sort of reject any kind of religious principles. They would also state that there is no particular meaning in the world, that there's no broader sort of meaning either to humanity or the world itself, that there's no particular reason why we exist. So that's one branch of nihilism. And then another branch of nihilism would state that certain things don't exist. So, objective truth, for example, or knowledge even, or morality even. So essentially nihilism annihilates, I don't know if that's where the name came from, probably not, but it is a good word maybe to use. Annihilates meaning, value, and sort of the idea of certainly of revelation or any kind of definite knowledge. Certainly any kind of religious doctrine or dogma, nihilism would oppose, even though itself has doctrines and dogmas within it, because it rejects these sort of ideas, and that is nihilism's dogma. So at the same time, it does also necessarily have dogmas itself. But anyway, it would deny, the idea even of religious dogma. So it's quite a broad sort of philosophy, you could say. It manifests in different ways depending on the person, and it can be applied in different ways too. It can be applied in a religious context, it can be applied in a philosophical context or a political context. So it really is quite a broad set of ideas, but they all center on some kind of rejection or some kind of denial of meaning, truth, revelation, and that's why nihilism has become or been seen maybe as the antithesis to religion itself. So it is a really interesting set of ideas. The reason why I've referred to it as a spectre, so meaning something that is sort of not necessarily, well, maybe evil, but maybe a better phrase would be to put something that is daunting, something that we don't want to happen or we don't want to take over. That's the reason why I've referred to it as the reason why I've referred to nihilism as that is because I see nihilism more and more in particularly among younger generations, which is quite worrying. I've seen it in philosophical debates, and I've seen people really hold to these sort of deconstructions and sort of denialist positions. And I don't know, it just worries me. And so that's why I've been thinking about nihilism for quite a long time. And I wanted to do sort of a video on this to kind of address some of the key issues of nihilism. So as I said earlier, nihilism is a rejection of objective truth. So it would reject, of course, that there could be any kind of actual certain truths about the world. That this wall behind me is painted white, for example, or that's just one example, but there's many other examples. Of course, it would deny things like revelation, which is a claim to truth, isn't it? And that's why it rejects a lot of religious principles, because they also make an sort of a claim to objective truth, don't they, in different religions? So that's why it kind of rubs religion up along the wrong way in that sense, because it rejects all of those ideas. It also rejects the idea of maybe not knowledge itself, but certain knowledge. So this idea that we can have any definite knowledge, that this is in, and it comes back to truth, really, doesn't it? That certain knowledge leads to truth. I think it would reject that. It also rejects things like morality, which is quite interesting, partly because, well, morality is often based in religious principles and beliefs. So again, that would be why nihilism would reject that. It also, and connected to morality, its rejection of morality, it also rejects value and meaning, which I think, again, are some of those core values of religion, aren't they? And even certain ideologies even as well. If you are rejecting values or meaning in the world, then you automatically then must reject things like morality, because morality, a certain moral system, is based on the achievement or resembling a certain set of values or a certain aim. But if there is no aim in the world, if there are no values in the world, no values to aspire to, then there also cannot be morality, because morality is based on these kinds of values and meanings. So that's why, in a way, nihilism's rejection of truth and its rejection of value and meaning leads to its rejection of knowledge, morality, and therefore its rejection of religion and religious institutions as well, and even certain political and ideological institutions too. So the main point to make is that nihilism is very much, maybe you could use the word rejectionist. It's very much based on this idea of rejecting these ideas, these things that oftentimes we cling to. But at the same time, I mean, some religions do that themselves. You know, some religions or philosophical systems, they do reject certain values, they do reject certain claims to truth or certain meaning or certain revelations. But what religions do is that they place or contribute their own, or fill the void, they fill the gap of what they've rejected with their own truths, their own values, their own meanings, their own revelation. That's the difference between what religion does in, you know, for example, if a new religion comes along, it might reject some of the truths, values, and meanings of an older religion. What that religion would then do is fill in the gaps with its own ideas. Nihilism doesn't do that, though. All nihilism does, which is kind of annoying, really, it comes along and rejects all of these values, meanings, truth, and that leads to a kind of the person being left with nothing, really, no kind of value or morality or meaning at all. So that's why sometimes it's associated with the idea of despair or depression, maybe, because, of course, with there being no meaning in the world, but also no meaning to your own personal life, that could lead to mental health issues, depression, maybe. We need meaning. And that's, again, starting to reveal now, hopefully, why I've referred to nihilism as a spectre, as something that we need to avoid, because I think that there is some degree of correspondence between the rise of nihilistic thinking in society and the rise of and certainly and contrasting with that, a decline in religious belief and the rise in mental health issues, depression, and sort of a lack of purpose or meaning in life. I do think it's part of these sort of nihilistic ideas, which is why, again, nihilism is sometimes associated with, depression, despair, because it doesn't fill that gap. It rejects everything and kind of moves on and doesn't kind of fill the gap of what humans need. And that's the kind of, in a way, that's the kind of, I don't know, the harshness of nihilism. The harshness of nihilism is that it comes along and it rejects all of these value systems, meaning systems that are created by human beings, and says that all these are wrong. They're all, nothing can be known, nothing is true, there is no value or meaning to anything, and then just leaves, and there is no you're kind of left kind of saying, well, if there is nothing, then what is there? That's what I've always thought with nihilism, is that it kind of leaves you very empty, you know. It kind of leaves you with this gap, this gaping hole in your heart. You know what I mean? That you kind of think, well, if nothing's true, or there's no meaning to life, then what am I supposed to do? You know, you're kind of left in this limbo kind of place. And that's the reason why I refer to nihilism as being a bit of a spectre. I think nihilism is important, as I said earlier. I think it's such an interesting set of ideas that can manifest in many different ways, of course. Not all of them manifesting in this sort of rigid way. There are different variations on nihilism and different forms of nihilism. But ultimately, I think that nihilism should remain in the philosophical sphere, but not in the social sphere, not in the societal sphere. The moment that nihilism starts to gain social traction, you know, ideas like even related to things like atheism, maybe, or even, and I wanted to talk to Andrew Copson about this, but we weren't able to establish another conversation, but even the connection between nihilism and various ideas within humanism. I think that there is a connection there, because humanism does sort of reject certain ideas, maybe not as it rejects obviously certain religious ideas. Maybe it's not as extreme as this nihilist position, but I don't think it's too far away from the nihilist position, particularly when you contrast religious belief with humanism. I think humanism is definitely closer to nihilism than it is to religious belief on the other opposite end of the spectrum. So but we weren't able to talk about that. So yeah, I think that the moment that nihilism starts to gain traction, whether it manifests in sort of a humanist movement or even in an atheist movement, or I mean, even in things like new atheism, you know, led by Richard Dawkins, for example, you know, I see that there is nihilistic undertones to some of what new atheism kind of advocates. I don't think it's just about atheism. I think it's about a deconstruction of many of these ideas, many of these building blocks of religion, really. It's not just about the fact that God doesn't exist. There are religions that state that don't believe that God exists, or maybe on non-theistic religions like Buddhism, for example, and even branches of Hinduism too. So it's nothing really to do with that. It's more about what does new atheism and even the broader humanist movement, what can it fill the gaps with? If it's going to take away God, that weakens some of these basic building blocks, doesn't it? Like meaning, value, truth, knowledge, morality. If you gain all of those building blocks from the existence of God and revelation, etc., you're going to need to fill that gap with something. And whether science can do that, certainly in some aspects, certainly in the knowledge category, you know, science can fill that gap, certainly. But whether science can give us a morality, whether science can provide us with value and meaning in life, is another thing. And that's one of the issues as well with people who kind of advocate I'm not talking as much about nihilism now because it's more extreme, but more of a kind of new atheist, humanist position. Yes, okay, they get rid of God. What are they placing in the gap where God was? Maybe they'll put science in there. But again, you know, as I've said, you know, can science fill that gap? I don't think it can. I think it can fill the knowledge gap, but not some of these other building blocks. So I think that ultimately nihilism is probably more of an extreme form of this sort of rejection, denial philosophy. But I do see undertones of nihilism in the humanist movement, in the new atheist movement. And I think that that is having a detrimental effect on society. And it is causing this sort of decline in religion, really, I think. Decline in belief, maybe. And we need new movements, though, to kind of push back against that. And I really see Astronism as being a new movement that can push back against this sort of nihilist, new atheist, humanist, even sort of fervor, really, that is existing right now. I mean, obviously, I'm referring to the most sort of core extreme branches of humanism here when I'm talking about humanism in relation to new atheism and nihilism. I do know and I am aware that humanism is a very broad movement, and that even, maybe some humanists, even believe in God, or believe in some kind of certainly very many values and meanings in life. So, I do realize that I am aware that humanism is a very broad movement. But I am talking more about the very sort of hardcore humanists who certainly reject religious institutions, but also reject seemingly some of these other building blocks of religion too. And to me, that's worrying. I mean, if you look at like the UK, for example, last year, the data came out for the statistics on religious affiliation. And I can't remember the exact statistics, but no religion now makes up, a huge proportion of the UK population. I've got it here. It's official. England and Wales among the least religious countries in the world. The data published that it had jumped from 25% to 37% non-religious in 2021. So that's a huge shift in society, and no one seems to be talking about it. Certainly not enough people seem to be talking about this. It's really worrying, not just because I'm the founder of a new religious movement. It's nothing really to do with that. It's got to do with what are our values? Where are we headed? What is our identity? I think, and religion's played an important role in shaping the identity, not just of this country, but of many countries in Europe and beyond. And if we're just going to go and reject religion now, like 37% of this country have done, what are we going to put in its place? What are we putting in its place? I think it is really interesting whether all those 37% of this country believe in nothing, absolutely nothing, and are convinced nihilists and atheists. I don't think that's true. I think that the phrase "no religion" is not very helpful, really. There's a lot that needs to change on the census and how they present that question of religious affiliation and the answers that can be given for that. But, certainly that group of people have beliefs that are not part of the mainstream religions, and maybe a lot of them are humanist. Maybe a lot of them just haven't even thought about religion or don't want to think about it, or they have certain preconceived ideas about religion and they're kind of hesitant to associate themselves with that. There is this idea that part of that 37% of this country, England and Wales, that part of them are sort of spiritual but not religious, which is a category that has existed. This idea that, you know, you sort of believe in sort of an afterlife maybe, or spiritualism maybe, or maybe even some kind of God maybe, but you don't associate yourself with a particular religious institution or a particular religion in you know, in that sense of it being Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, etc. So I suspect some of that 37% are sort of, they have some kind of beliefs, but it isn't just associated with one religion. But of course, you know, the humanist movement, Humanist UK, have used that data to kind of, you know, to their advantage. Okay, they've kind of, I think that they've tried to claim that group of people as being their own. I don't think that's true. I don't think the non-religious community is, of course it's a community and there are irreligious people, but I don't know, they're not making any affirmations. So are they really a coherent social group? Do you know what I mean? I think that's a bit strange. So you're a social group based on your denial or rejection of a particular idea. Okay, but what do you believe then? Do you know what I mean? So it is a bit strange to me that there's been this kind of claim over this sort of 37% of the population as being non-religious, and that's sort of being claimed by the humanist movement in a way. Well, not really, because probably a lot of those people do have certain beliefs, but they just don't associate with a particular religion. It doesn't mean that they are convinced atheist. It doesn't mean that they are even even humanist. It doesn't mean that at all. It just means that they don't associate with a particular religion. Anyway, so not to get too off topic, but I just wanted to use the UK, and you could look at France and other countries in Europe and the decline of religion. I think it is associated in part with a movement towards nihilistic thinking, maybe not a hard nihilism, but certainly a movement towards that. You know, the rejection of revelation, morality, certain sort of systems of morality that have been established by religion, certain values and meaning to life that have been established by various different religions. Certainly there is a movement away from these kind of building blocks of religion, really. We do find in humanism sort of the affirmation that, you know, humanist values, sort of loving one another, and I don't know, any there you can go and look on Humanist UK's website or any kind of humanist organization's website, and they list certain values and meaning that they have attached to the world and them and themselves. But again, is it enough? Is it enough? That's my question to them. That's the gauntlet placing down. Are your values, meaning, morality enough? And someone was talking to me recently in a lecture, because I'm lecturing at the moment, and a student was saying, well, what about this idea of the argument that Louis Theroux found himself in with, I think it was like a Muslim scholar, I think. And I think Louis Theroux is maybe was advocating humanism, I think. And the Muslim scholar said, well, where are you getting your authority from? You're telling me that these are your values, these are your morality and meaning in the world. Where are you getting your authority from? This is something that I've been thinking about recently in Astronism. You know, where do I get my authority from? Where does Astronism get its authority from to make the claims that it does? So, you know, it is an interesting question to think about, this idea of the problem of authority, really. You know, where are humanists getting their authority from? They would say, they get it from hundreds of years of ethical, philosophical thought that has sort of come to the best conclusions of what is ethical and moral and what certain values we should have. But again, that also is a bit ignorant of different cultures because they have different values, they have different ways of seeing the world. You could argue that humanism is very much from a Western point of view. What is considered valuable to the West, to the sort of Western culture. I have definitely seen that in the humanist movement. Definitely. I do think that there is an issue there for the humanists where they I think they can be a bit ignorant of other cultures, and they do seem to be coming very much from kind of a Western idea of what is valuable and meaningful and ethical. Not to say that that's wrong. It's just to say that, well, ultimately that means that the humanist, sort of the new humanist movement as it has emerged, sort of humanist UK, etc., does that mean that they can really become a fully international movement when they don't take into consideration the value systems of other cultures? Again, it comes from a particularly Western point of view, doesn't it? And so that's the issue. I mean, even you could say that Astronism does come from a certain point of view. Everything comes from a certain point of view. You could say even, East Asian philosophy. So Confucianism comes from an East Asian point of view and doesn't take the West into consideration. You'd be sat here all day talking about it, but the ultimate issue here is can nihilism, well, nihilism doesn't attempt anyway. Nihilism doesn't attempt to bring any kind of, to fill the gap that is left behind by its rejection of all of these building blocks of religion. It doesn't attempt to do that. It just rejects them and then moves on. The question for groups like the New Atheists, humanists, and maybe even just general atheists or non-religious is, what are they filling their gaps with? What are they filling these gaps with in terms of morality, values, meaning to life, truth, knowledge? Where are they getting their sources of authority from? Where are they getting those sources of ideas and knowledge from? And what makes their sort of positions fulfill these gaps? Yeah. So I think that's one of the issues with nihilism. So the second sort of issue that I wanted to talk about today with regards to nihilism was the issue of existential nihilism, which is probably the most, shall we say, the most common form of nihilism, the most widely referenced form of nihilism, and basically talks about the idea that, there is no meaning to life. This is the kind of stereotypical idea of nihilism, that there is no meaning to life, that there are no sort of, that obviously God doesn't exist, that there is no particular meaning to the universe, and so therefore there is no particular values or morality, etc., etc. So this really strikes at the heart of what is nihilism, really. And again, I'm going to associate existential nihilism with certain forms of depression. And I'm going to talk from personal point of view here. I have known people with mental health issues in my own personal life, and from someone who is regularly interacting with these philosophical ideas, I could really see in this person certain nihilistic ideas coming through in their mindset. They seem to have a nihilistic mindset, so they didn't see any meaning to their life. they didn't see any purpose to their own life, or to the lives of others, or even to, you know, the broader world. Certainly they were non-religious. They didn't kind of attend any kind of religious groups or anything. And certainly I found that they were more prone to be negative, pessimistic, and to kind of give up really at the first sight of trouble. And I do associate this with existential nihilism. Think about it. If you don't see any purpose to the world or your own life, then you're not going to try very hard, are you? You're not going to kind of, you know, if you come to the first hurdle and you think, well, there's no point in life anyway, why am I even doing this? Why am I putting myself through this? You're going to fall, aren't you, at the first hurdle? And I think as well, people who are involved in this nihilist mindset, what I found is sometimes they resort to hedonism to kind of fill that gap. Now, I'm more talking here about, again, existential nihilism, which is the idea of, you know, no meaning to life. What I've found is that those who kind of have that idea and belief and who are non-religious, they do resort more to kind of hedonistic pursuits. So materialism certainly is a branch of that, consumerism, because they don't see any kind of other values in the world, or any other kind of meaning in the world. And so they kind of take the view, well, let's just try and kind of enjoy myself as much as I can and get as much pleasure out of this one life that I have, because obviously they won't believe in afterlife, you know, by consuming as much as I can and getting as much material things as I can. This has been widely spoken about in society. It's nothing new, the emergence of consumerism and materialism. I think it does have roots, though. Certainly it has roots in hedonism, obviously, but I think it does also have roots, even at the very, very core of it, in an existential nihilism, a very either a lack of meaning or value or morality attached to life, or a very weak understanding of value, meaning, morality, a very weak understanding of that. And that's what, to me, can lead not only to existential nihilism, but to hedonism, and then on to materialism, consumerism, etc. Do all people who belong or see themselves or could be described as materialists, you know, hold nihilist views? No, obviously not. You know, I am generalizing here. There are exceptions, probably quite a few exceptions. This is just in my own personal experience of those who sort of resort to materialism that I found, but also on the other side, those who, again, maybe have issues with depression. And it isn't too much of a logical leap, is it? I mean, for us who are kind of studying the phenomenon of nihilism, it isn't much of a leap to say, so if you are an existential nihilist and you don't believe that there's any kind of meaning to your own life or the universe or any kind of values, it's not much of a leap to suggest that this person may ultimately get depressed, because we need purpose and value and meaning in life. That's the fundamental basis. We need that. Now, what some nihilists have said is just because we need these things to keep sane doesn't make them true. And that I can agree with to a certain extent. Yes, I understand that. Just because we need something doesn't make it true, certainly. you can then sort of argue against it, I suppose, in sort of, well, what is truth? What does it mean for something to be true? You know, if someone's getting something out of an idea, then does that not constitute some kind of value, or at least some kind of utility? So, you know, you could kind of take a utilitarian sort of approach to religious ideas in that sense. You know, they are serving a purpose. They do have a utility in the world and in human life. So we wouldn't want to do without them. And that's one thing that is worrying when we see this kind of growth of irreligion, really, is what are we filling the gap with? And again, I'll keep mentioning that. And this might be quite controversial, but yes, I am also going to state my opinion, and I've not done research on this yet. I probably will do in the future. But I do think that there is a correlation between the decline of religion and the rise of not only mental health, but also depression, and also, of course, materialism and nihilism and hedonism and consumerism, all these isms. I do think there is a correlation there. I really, really do. And that's quite sad, but it's also quite worrying as well, because we need these things. We really, really do. And that comes to kind of my third point that I was going to say today. So this is Astronism versus nihilism. Because, well, I'll start off by stating that my Astronist point of view is that there is value, meaning, morality, truth, knowledge, purpose to life. And obviously from the Astronist point of view, we get all of these things from the endeavour of transcension. Go and take a look at some of my other Astronist videos in this season or previous seasons if you don't know much about Astronism. Astronism is a religion, but it is also a philosophy. And it has a philosophical position which kind of affirms values, meaning, you know, purpose to life. It has a very strong, clear sort of vision for humanity, a vision for individuals and collective human species. It has a very strong sort of set of ideas about the cosmos and the structure of the cosmos and why we're here. It answers a lot of those questions like any other religion should do. And so therefore, it is very much juxtaposed from nihilism, particularly the existential nihilism as well. Obviously Astronism affirms things like it sees transcension as a revelation, as a progressive revelation, so therefore it does believe that there are certain objective truths. Transcension and the sort of salvation of humanity among the stars being one of those objective truths, of course, that Astronism does kind of affirm. But as well, it does, as I said, it attaches a certain morality, and we get that from what progresses or regresses transcension. That is what we consider to be moral or immoral. Obviously, this Astronism has a very clear idea of the aims of the human species, where we need to be heading to, what we want to achieve. So in turn, it has a very sort of solid understanding of value. It imbues a lot of meaning into human life. And so, you know, these are the things we need. And that's going to be my statement today, I think, is that we need these things. We need value. We need meaning, because we're losing it. I'm not saying that we should be Christians forever. You know, here in the UK, we've been Christians in this country for majority Christians for over 1,000 years. I'm not saying that we should remain Christians, but what I am, and I'm not even saying that we should all convert to Astronism. I mean, that would be great, but I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that we still need philosophies, religions, and ideas that affirm value, meaning, morality, and even things like objective truth and knowledge as well, and that they value these things. And that's why I sort of worry when I do come across more and more people who are irreligious and who hold, even if they're not a full nihilist, they may hold certain nihilist views. And I have come across this more and more. And I think, again, as I said, I think this is part of a broader rejection of religion, you could argue. So you could see, maybe you could argue, but this is all speculative, maybe you could argue that the broader secularization of society and the rejection of religion has caused a bit of an offshoot of nihilism, but really, nihilism will never gain any proper ground in society. I really hope that's true. I really hope that nihilistic ideas will not prevail, because I would be really worried about where our society was heading if that were the case. Essentially, I do, obviously, from my point of view, I want to put across this idea of affirming values. Obviously, I have very specific values that are aligned with an Astronist worldview. But any values or meaning in general, or any kind of, religious affiliation in general, or even philosophical position, is good. What I also am sort of wary of is this idea, or this sort of trend of people making their minds up about religion and becoming irreligious, or even going as far as becoming nihilistic in their mindset and kind of suffering as a result of that, and not having done any proper research on religion, on different philosophical positions, and they've just kind of come to these positions, and they then kind of exist in these echo chambers online, where they can talk to other people from other parts of the country or the world, who share their nihilistic, atheistic, irreligious ideas, and that kind of festers, and they never really challenge themselves to really explore the breadth of religion and to really explore the breadth of philosophy, because philosophy, even in the branch of humanism, can provide, a great many values and meaning to life, and all these great things that we need. Morality, ethics, even. There's a lot of people who haven't thought, who don't want to spend the time doing it, because they don't, maybe because they don't see any value in life, and so don't see any value in or any meaning, so they don't see any value or meaning in studying the questions of life. Maybe we can't all be philosophers and sitting around around the fire and sort of contemplating life. I understand that, but I just think that I've come across people who have very strong positions on various topics, including atheism, but also certain nihilistic ideas, and they've just never done any research. They've never done any proper research at all. They've never properly looked into it. Maybe they were raised irreligious, maybe their parents were religious, and so they've never really looked at it properly, and they've just kind of adopted their parents' views of the world. I just think it's such a dangerous thing. It's so dangerous, and particularly even when you see it in children. This is what I also worry about, is I was talking to a little kid not long ago. It was one of my siblings, and he was saying like, "Well, I don't really believe in anything," and he's not really a little kid anymore. He's like, he's like a early teens, and he's like, "I don't really believe, and don't really see any meaning to life or any values." And I thought, gosh, that is so sad. Why? That is really, really sad, really sad, and worrying as well. This is what astronism is for me, because the reason why I think about this so much is because astronism to me is my life. And I know that for other people who are maybe just astronists rather than the founder of astronism, they don't want to make it their life. I get that. But for me, if I didn't have astronism, if I wasn't an astronist, gosh, I'd feel terrible, because the value that astronism gives me, the value that creating astronism, but also believing in astronism and its values and aims and ideas and purposes, it provides me with such meaning. It provides me with such a goal, and it provides me with motivation. I think, again, there must be a correlation there between nihilistic thinking and a lack of motivation. Definitely. It's just logical. If you don't think that life has any meaning, or that, there's this horrible phrase of, life's a B word, and then you die, is that kind of a nihilistic idea. I've heard that being thrown around quite a lot, that quote. I don't know who it's from originally, but again, you're not going to want to get up in the morning, are you? You're not going to get up and do things and contribute to society as much. I don't know. It just, to me, it's just worrying. It is just worrying. And I do think that, if I didn't have astronism, gosh, I'd feel so kind of meaningless, really. Obviously, I'd fill other things with my life, etc. But, if I didn't have that religion there, that sort of strong philosophical moral values and those aims, not just for myself, but for humanity as a whole, not just thinking about yourself as an individual, but thinking about the whole society, thinking about collective humanity, the actual species. That's what astronism gets you to think about. Thinking about that is really healthy, I think. And that's why we need these building blocks of morality, values, meaning, knowledge, truth, revelation, aims, purpose. Yeah. We need these things as human beings. It's part of our necessary psychology. Yeah. And that's why I think that, again, there is this association that I'm making between mental health, particularly depression, and some of this kind of nihilistic thinking about life, and not having a sort of a solid purpose to life because you are irreligious, or because you have never really explored the philosophical questions of life. What I would also like to say as well, just before I sort of talk about the last point today, is this idea that, being an astronist for me, and having those values that certainly transcension provides me, and having that aim that transcension provides, not only for me, but for the broader humanity, it does sort of, it gives you this armor. That's how I like to think of it. It allows you to get through life easier, because it's and that's not to say that that's why you should convert to a religion, because life's easier. It's not easier, but it allows you to deal with things easier and better. I think the word is better, not easier. It allows you to deal with things better. You're more resilient at dealing with these problems, because you see the broader picture. You see that, for example, in the context of transcension, you see that, you know, your own sufferances here right now and the terrible things that you got to endure will make better for the future generations. It will become better for the future generations. So, you know, there is that idea that is part of transcension, that we have to work really hard now. We have to contribute to transcension. We have to, you know, we have to do all we can really to contribute to transcension, to see this transcensional endeavour through, for the betterment of those in the future. The slogan of the Astronist institution is for the betterment of peoples, and that really does capture the sort of values and meaning of at the sort of basis of transcension, really. So, you know, again, it just shows how Astronism, or even just having a certain identity and holding to certain values, can really give you that armor that you need in life, because there's a lot that's thrown at you in life, and you need this sort of solid, you know, moral value system and set of aims in your mind, that are both for yourself partly, but also working for broader humanity as well, and the broader society. Contributing to knowledge may be an example of that, you know, if you're an academic or an intellectual. You know, it's having that dual side to yourself. Yes, thinking for some parts individualistically, but then also other parts thinking collectively. It really does give you that armor that you need in life. So, you know, again, I don't want to ramble on, but that's why I see nihilism really as sort of the antithesis really to transcension, because transcension, particularly for me, from an Astronist point of view, provides these necessary building blocks to life, to existence, really. So I think that was it for. Oh, I was just going to say about, you know, Spectre of nihilism in society. I've kind of already spoke about that and explained my thinking behind that. I think that is it for today's video, everyone. So I'll go back to the first slide. So I hope you enjoyed it. Nihilism is something, again, as I said right at the beginning, it's a really interesting set of philosophies. I do think about it quite often because it just sort of challenges everything that you hold dear to yourself. So it's it's curious, you know, when you come across a set of ideas that kind of totally reject everything that you believe and that you've worked towards. It is kind of curious, and you do want to kind of understand why someone would maybe believe these things or reject these sort of fundamental building blocks. So, you know, nihilism is very interesting for that reason, but then also sort of in that philosophical realm. But if you remove it from that, and if it seeps into society, which is what I see it doing ever so slowly, I really do see that as a major problem. And I really, for that reason, am worried about the future, particularly in this more irreligious society. You know, I do think that is a worry. And so certainly we need a new movement, a new religion to come and rejuvenate religion in general, and to rejuvenate and push back against these sort of nihilistic, certainly these sort of, I wouldn't even say atheistic, but sort of certainly the nihilistic ideas of lack of meaning to life and etc., lack of belief, lack of faith maybe as well. And of course, I see Astronism as the movement to do that, as the religion to do that. But I'll leave that for another video, because I'm sure you've listened to a lot about Astronism already on this channel. So anyway, I won't take up any more of your time today. I hope you enjoyed this sort of little discussion video on the spectre of nihilism, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode of season 4 of A Conversation with Cometan. Goodbye, everybody.